So let's go ahead and get started. Today's webinar is sponsored by the Urban Waters Learning Network. My name is Diana Toledo. I work with River Network, which is one of the two organizations that coordinates that network alongside with my colleagues at Groundwork USA. And so with EPA support, we coordinate this network, which serves as a peer-to-peer network of people and organizations that are working on urban waterways, both to restore the waterways and to revitalize the communities that surround them. If you're not a member, please let me know, follow up via email after the session. We'd love to get you involved in accessing some of the training and networking opportunities that we provide. So with that, today's session is Complex Problems, Collaborative Solutions, Playing Games for Better Water Management Outcomes. We are super excited to bring you today's sessions. We've got a couple of great presenters who are really on the leading edge of this topic, which is in its very early phases. Both of our presenters today with the Army Corps of Engineers have been doing some really groundbreaking work on applying game theory and leveraging the interest in gaming in our society to water management outcomes and decisions. These are complex decisions. There's a lot of education and a lot of support that is needed for better decision making, and so gaming is one way we can do that. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce our two speakers. We're going to first hear from both of them, from Andrea first and Hunter second. And then we're going to break up into the two breakout rooms. So to kick us off is Andrea Carson. Andrea is a community planner and public involvement specialist for the Pittsburgh district of the Army Corps of Engineers. And she is one of that agency's experts on serious gaming and planning. Andrea plans and facilitates multi-hazard tournaments, which is a type of serious game employed for training, for relationship building, decision making, and for education purposes. And it assists in water resources planning for the U.S. Army Corps and for its partners. She recently published an article, Serious Gaming for Participatory Planning and Multi-Hazard Mitigation, in the International Journal of River Basin Management. So super excited to have Andrea. And we also are joined by Hunter Merritt, who is a senior planner on flood risk management for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in the Sacramento district. He has extensive experience working with floodplain management services program and with the Silver Jackets program to complete non-structural flood risk reduction projects across California, Nevada, and Utah. His primary goal is to increase public awareness of flood exposure through outreach and education, working alongside other federal agencies, state, local, and tribal partners. And he brings over 25 years of experience and training in facilitation, mediation, and conflict resolution, and now he's turning his attention to gaming. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to Andrea. Andrea, you want to go ahead and kick it off?
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to attend and speak to you all about the Multihazard Tournament. It's something that I've been piloting here for the Army Corps of Engineers now for about the past 4 years. We've held a Multihazard Tournament about every year so far that we've been testing out this new framework. And I also want to say that I have one of the folks who helped us do our tournament in Norfolk District on the line as well. So Michelle Hamer will be, I'll ask her to kind of comment along the way about her personal experience with the Multihazard Tournament so that you can hear from both the planning side and from the side of kind of the clients, if you will. So without further ado, what I would like to talk to you all about today is this multi-hazard tournament framework. And what I want you to, by the end of the presentation, I want you to know what the multi-hazard tournament is, why the Army Corps of Engineers is using this framework, and how we're using the framework. But ultimately, what I want you to be thinking about in the back of your head is, how could your organization use the multi-hazard tournament? And Hunter's also going to show you a different type of serious game, and what can you get out of it based off of what you hear we're getting out of it, and maybe there's some opportunities for exploration into the future. Okay, so what is a multi-hazard tournament, and what can it actually help you achieve? Well, A multi-hazard tournament is what we consider to be a condensed and accelerated version of shared vision planning. And it couples your serious gaming, so your fun, your competition, with collaborative decision making. And ultimately, we use it to plan for not one, but multiple hazards, hence the name. And what it allows us to do often is involve participants from a wide variety of fields, because we're dealing with, say, flood and drought and water quality. You can have experts from all these different walks of life come to your tournament and share their experiences and share their knowledge with each other. And so ultimately, the tournament we've used for kind of multiple purposes depending on the scale and the objective of the tournament. And that might be relationship building or learning, planning, and even to some extent decision making. But often once you're headed towards the decision making side of the scale, it often becomes less game-like and more just decision support tool and assistance. But the nexus, or the start of the multi-hazard tournament, came from the idea of oftentimes we are complacent in our planning for a hazard. What we find here is something similar to this hydro-illogical cycle, right? You have a hazard and you know it's coming and you panic, and then it happens, and then you react. And then after a while, you become apathetic. You might experience something else, and then you kind of let it go away, and then some hazard comes back again. And so what we wanted to do was get people out of the workshop mode, meeting fatigue, and give them a different way to engage with the information. And so that's ultimately why the multi-hazard tournament came to be. But what we found to be useful is that it can help us serve and meet these objectives. So you can see here, it can be used to identify the costs and trade-offs among certain strategies that a community might be considering to reduce risk and address hazards. It might also identify strengths and weaknesses in various strategies, as well as create new collaborations in terms of ideas and in terms of relationships. And then that helps us to improve communication among stakeholders, which can ultimately ease your planning. Even if you don't come to a decision, you've at least met that person who maybe down the line you need to make that decision with. So why is USACE hosting multi-hazard tournaments? Well, obviously, we find value in the fact that it meets the objectives I just mentioned, but we also found that we can't do planning alone. We need to work with knowledgeable partners who understand how we work as an organization, who can understand what authorities we have, and so, what problems can we assist with, and what do we need others to come to the table with to help us solve a problem. It also does provide a lens for a regional focus on actual problems. So we tend to kind of look at watersheds or a larger area rather than one small specific area in our multi-hazard tournaments. But we are most of the time focusing on real life scenarios. What we have found though is that we're able to take the tournament and bring it to, I actually just took one tournament to Hunter in Sacramento and it was originally our San Antonio tournament. And even if they weren't discussing the place they were in, it still helped them talk about the issues in a way that helped them remove themselves from some of the things that might tether them to the problem. So it can be used in that way as well. It allows us to do, again, the shared vision planning and stakeholder engagement, but really some of the neat things it allows us to do is test and utilize tools that we have developed as the core and some tools that our partners may have developed. We, in one tournament, had a set of master plans that were just sitting on the shelves. And so the tournament helped us bring those master plans to life in the decision-making process. And so that was a really neat utilization of this tool. And ultimately, because we're looking at how to solve problems, this helps our stakeholders, our partners, to identify what are the future investments and operations that they want to be working with us for. So those are some of the applications that we've seen. But I also want to have Michelle comment for a moment on some of the opportunities or the value that she thought the multi-hazard tournament brought to Norfolk District. Michelle, would you care to comment?
Absolutely. Thank you, Andrea. One of the things that I was really excited about was the conversation that it encouraged during the tournament. There was a diverse background of participants, and they really got interested in it. It was much better than certainly presenting the information to them, and I really enjoyed the fact that we investigated not just USACE programs and opportunities, but also FEMA engagements and mitigation grant funds, and also opportunities to the state and the local communities to try and develop a more comprehensive solution. So looking at it from different angles allowed the teams to develop a more comprehensive solution. And as we went through the two scenarios, it was also encouraging to see how teams started to align more closely together. In the competitive fashion of trying to win, they started to implement new ideas that they had not formally, and that was really exciting to see how they evolved over time. And I'm hoping to see us utilize tournaments like this in the future so that we can investigate new and interesting ideas and really take in those different backgrounds when we consider our projects. Not everything can be done by the Corps, and that's definitely the way we want people to what we want people to understand, but we can definitely develop a solution that's comprehensive and pulls in all those different opportunities together.
Thanks, Michelle. And I'll ask Michelle to comment a couple more times so you can have a great sense of what her tournament actually included a little bit later on. All right, so you might be asking, what is shared vision planning? I've mentioned that a couple of times now. So just a quick overview. It's a concept that we've kind of adopted as the core, and it combines what we consider the collaboration, the systems modeling, and the planning piece together. And so we call that shared vision planning. And so ultimately, the difference between shared vision planning and any other type of planning is that it tends to be models-based of some sort, whether that's a computer model, whether it's a conceptual model. It uses stakeholders and involves them in this technical analysis rather than separating the stakeholders from the technical analysis. And so we're always asking, how is this model going to be used? Who is going to be using the model, and what are they going to be using it for? And so we kind of took the traditional shared vision planning framework that we use in the core and created this new multi-hazard tournament concept. So the multi-hazard tournament builds on shared vision planning by adding the competitive element, and it gives you that experiential component while your traditional shared vision planning might have some adult learning where you're testing things within your model and seeing results. The multi-hazard tournament is you're living in the moment, you're trying to compete. So it helps to reinvigorate kind of some of those learning lessons that you might not get if you're just kind of doing it yourself on a model. It also allows, again, that kind of relationship building with the team-based approach. And we really like the idea that it allows for failure in the planning process. So you can learn what works best and why in a safe environment with everyone else learning that as well around you. So the tournament itself, so shared vision planning is based off of a planning process. And so this here on the screen is our 6-step planning process that we have at the core. And similarly, the tournament is built around those ideas. So when you start the tournament, you're meeting with stakeholders, you're talking to the clients, you want to know who wants to be involved, who's dealing with the issues that you want to engage with on your tournament. And sometimes they're even helping you identify those issues, right? So the first step of the planning process is, what are the problems? And the second part is, what are your opportunities? And based off of that, then, once you've identified your problems and opportunities, you start to figure out how you want to use your tournament. And you say, okay, so we want to base this off of some type of condition, probably the condition that we're dealing with now. What information do we have that could set the baseline for what we're building our tournament off of and the decisions that are going to be making? And then also, what are some of the future scenarios that we want to be considering? What information do we have about those? We then compile that information and put it into the model. And then the next question we ask our stakeholders and those who are helping to plan the tournament is, what are some of the solutions that you've thought about trying to invest in to reduce your risk to these hazards? Are there combinations that you want to explore? Are they non-structural? Are they even policy-based, or are they structural? And so we have those conversations as to what kind of alternatives do they want to engage in. The tournament then, that's kind of building the tournament framework. And then the day of the tournament is having that competitive element where you are evaluating the alternatives, the different solutions that you might use to address the solution. You're comparing them between themselves and against other teams' packages that they're creating for a solution set. And then ultimately you get to see and hear what is the rationale for why one is better than another. What are those trade-offs? How much do they cost and how much benefit are you getting? And so the tournament itself is based around those conversations. And oftentimes, as is the planning process, the multi-hazard tournament is iterative. So you have one round, say, on your existing conditions, what's happening today, and your team learns what's going on, and then you have a second round where they're tested and using the knowledge that they gained in the first round for a different scenario, maybe climate change, and they get to test out some of the things and see how the alternatives maybe react differently in a different scenario. And this is how one of our tournaments has been built. This was based off of the San Antonio tournament. So I mentioned the data inputs and the alternatives, which here is action, and then we put that into the model to simulate based off of the existing conditions, and the models then gives us that analysis that we can use during the tournament. It gives us the answers, right? So what are those trade-offs? How much do they cost? What are the benefits? And then ultimately the game where the participants are exploring those decisions, and they're being basically scored upon those metrics you see here. And so what I'd like Michelle to comment on, if you would, Michelle, is what were some of the factors or the problems and opportunities that you formed your tournament around, and what was that experience like with your stakeholders and figuring out how to plan your tournament?
Sure, thank you, Andrea. Some of the data that we included was the North Atlantic Coast Comprehensive Study, so water surface elevations that we had just been completed. We also incorporated hazard mitigation plan information. So the idea was using existing data and also a data set that the local governments were very familiar with, and trying to see also how far we could take that data set. It's something that sometimes goes into a plan and that's as far as it goes. So we were trying to see if we could also add more life to the data that was already developed. And we also had the opportunity of having a study that was underway within that local area, where we were able to incorporate that. We also pulled in information from local governments. There was one local government that had a program that we were able to incorporate. But those are different things. One of the challenges, though, as we learned as we went through the process, is defining the limit and the depth of the data. How detailed do you want to get? Because that can add to the timing and certainly can get into a lot of detail that may distract from the game rather than add to it.
Thanks, Michelle. I appreciate that. And so actually, Michelle makes a great point as to the level of detail that your tournament kind of encompasses. And in a couple of slides, I'll talk about what level of detail you might need depending on the objectives of your tournament. So thanks for kind of prompting that, Michelle. I appreciate that. Okay, so before we get to the level of detail, I wanted to show a picture from a tournament that was held. And this is just what the general kind of group of people that you have at your tournament. You typically have someone who is kind of running the tournament, your MC, and you often have multiple teams. They're interdisciplinary teams as much as possible. You have some referees, and again, we try to add those gaming components. So there are referee shirts, and there can be whistles, and there can be flags. We try to, incorporate that as much as possible. We have a big timer countdown on the screen as well for the rounds. And then you also have fans sometimes. In a couple of our tournaments, we've had fan favorites, and they're able to hear all the presentations and kind of vote on which ones they like the best. And so we try to incorporate them as well. So that's what your tournament looks like. A tournament typically is set up into rounds, depending on how many rounds or scenarios you want. But ultimately, it looks like something like this that you see on the screen. You start with some introductory set of base knowledge that everyone enters the tournament in with. And so what we actually have done is we've now called it the playbook. So it's something we send out to participants ahead of time. They can do a little read ahead to make sure they're kind of using the same language, understand how the game will be played. And then we enter the tournament and they're given the scenario. They then can choose between the different management options that are either provided, or they can, as you can see here, innovate on their own. Of course, we can only include so much into our model before we get there, but we also want new ideas to spring from these conversations. So we want to allow for innovation if possible. And then ultimately, based off of the solutions that are chosen, there's scoring involved. Oftentimes, there is a technical score that is informed by the modeling that has taken place before the tournament. But then there's also a peer score, and we found that's equally as important because it helps give context. It helps say that, wow, you know, you're building a dam might be absolutely fantastic in the middle of, you know, nowhere. Building some type of like channelized improvement in the middle of a city would be a terrible idea, and here's why. So it kind of has that peer check where, yeah, in the tournament it might say, this is a great, you know, your decision support tool will say, best flood risk reduction ever. But in reality, it doesn't make sense for the community that is being built in. So those are the kind of conversations that we want to have at the tournament. And then ultimately, the teams receive their scores. They use the scores to reflect on what they did well and what they want to change, and then they are given another opportunity in the next scenario. So that's the basic tournament framework. And of course, we tweak things for every tournament and every need, but that gives you kind of a good sense of how it happens in the day. To carry out any tournament, I found that there are 3 foundational pieces that are required. The first is, do you have a set of hazards? And we use the term hazards, but they could be problems or issues that maybe aren't even hazards, but it's just, that's how we've applied our framework. But do you have a problem? Is there a risk that you want to address? That's number 1. The second thing is, are there adaptation options? We also say management measures. Are there solutions that you want to explore? And then, can impacts from these problems and implementing the solutions be measured in some way? Whether it's really qualitative or quantitative, as long as there's some way to be able to measure or talk to the impacts. That's essentially how you build a tournament. You figure out those pieces, and then everything else kind of gets worked in between. So I mentioned that I would talk a little bit about the complexity and how much to be invested. So this here, we've put together based off of the tournaments that we and others have held. And tournaments can either be super time intensive and fairly expensive, or they can be not complex at all and not require that many resources. And so ultimately it depends on that objective. So if your objective, for instance, is kind of sensitization of the issues and potential solutions, or relationship building, then you can start with a tournament that is simple, that isn't looking to have very detailed answers, because it's not going to be used for decision making. It's going to be used to help and kind of teach people how things might look, what your system even looks like, and then also what are some of the things that your neighbor or your community member or your mayor are thinking about those issues. That's how you can use the tournament. You could also then increase the complexity, and this will require kind of, I say medium resources here, where you're starting to quantify your risks and your impacts, and you're including costs and maybe some trade-offs. And what we do there is use an Excel-based interface. And you can even insert some basic geographic information into your Excel, or use paper maps and those types of things. So it's kind of a combination of the paper and the Excel. And then finally, if you do have ample resources and you're looking for those detailed trade-offs to help inform perhaps planning and decision making, then you can use a web-based interface is what we've done. And that really gives you your quantified risk and your impacts, and really helps people kind of fine-tune their decision making process. So I just want to kind of give you a quick gamut of the types of tournaments that have happened. This actually is one that we as the Corps of Engineers did not host, but we gave them our multi-hazard framework and kind of coached them through how the process would work. And the group in Costa Rica did it for a drought tournament. So they did only focus on one hazard, not multi-hazard, but it's the same concept in that the community here was dealing with drought. They had, as you can see on the screen, actually, so those white squares were the different adaptation options that you could use. And the size of the square, I believe, indicated the length of time it would take to implement that alternative. They also had what were some of the impacts, and so those were the yellow. So they were able to quantify impacts or match impacts to different alternatives. And so they were able to ultimately, and the other cool component of this was that each team was given a different amount of money. So what they were able to see by the end of the tournament was what are some of the alternatives that, regardless of how much money you have, you're always implementing and that were a priority for the community. And then which alternatives were nice to have if you had the money, but weren't necessarily the base of perhaps a solution set that they would invest in to address the drought hazard. And what they did find here was that this kind of sparks, I think they're going to do a second tournament. So they've learned the community priorities, they've had that conversation, and they had plans to become more technical and detailed as kind of the meetings progressed within this community. There also then was, this is actually our first tournament, it was a San Antonio Multihazard Tournament. And what we did here was we did a whole watershed, so the San Antonio River watershed, and we worked with the San Antonio River Authority. And what we did was we used an Excel-based tool. I'll just quickly pull this up on the screen. Teams were able to select adaptation options. They could also innovate using the button for design custom option impacts. And what they would do, we had our referee, they would present their innovation to a referee, and they would say, I propose that we would invest in this adaptation option, and we think that it would affect the metrics in this way. It would reduce flood impacts by this much and water availability by this much. And the referee would they would consult with each other and come back to the team and say, we agree, you can insert it, or that doesn't actually work the way you think it is. This is how we think it would impact it. If you're still willing to go forward with it, then you can. So that was how we incorporate innovation here. And then as the team selected their options, they could see on these slider bars how much impact they were having. Of course, it was somewhat granular, right? So we have critical, bad, acceptable, good, without firm numbers, but it gave them a sense of how they were doing compared to one another. And we also actually compared it to with project and without project conditions. So what if they did nothing? Where did they stand? And then when they made the investment, how much either better or worse was it getting? And this here, just quickly, was the examples of some of the adaptation options and the metrics that they had to contest with at this first tournament. We then also held a second tournament. And so what we did here was actually break it down into two different counties, or rather Bexar County and the southern counties, because we found that in our first tournament, they're actually dealing with significantly different issues. But we wanted to actually use the San Antonio River Authority master plans for this. So what we did was we took all the information in the master plans, and what the master plan said was, this is how San Antonio River Authority, based off of modeling that they had already completed, would recommend that communities do to reduce their flood risk. It also talked about ecosystem degradation and water quality improvements, as well as drought mitigation. So based off of the modeling that was already done in these master plans and the information presented, we created a web-based tool. And so here's an example of that. What we were able to do is there were different damage centers that teams could choose from. And within that damage center, they could choose any of the 4 alternatives you see on the left side of the screen. So there's a traditional infrastructure option, infiltration policy, freeboard policy, and a buyout. And the teams could learn about each of the damage centers, what's around there, what is the recommended traditional infrastructure option and cost in that area, and then how much overall, based off of, they could select, you know, one adaptation option at a certain damage center, or they can invest all their adaptation options in one damage center, just based off of how much they cost and what the budget was. And they ultimately, on the very right side of your screen, that's where they got their score. So they could see how they were doing, they could see what they were selecting between the damage centers to come up with a comprehensive plan for the county. And then finally, what I'm going to ask Michelle to just quickly give a couple-minute description of is what we did for our most recent tournament, which dealt with different hazards for the Lower Virginia Peninsula Coastal Resilience Tournament. Michelle, would you mind giving an overview?
Absolutely. So we incorporated the data from the hazard mitigation plan, and we incorporated data from the North Atlantic Coast Comprehensive Study, and provided multiple options, including elevation and acquisition of structures. We had floodgates, and we allowed them to also consider opportunities for increasing the community rating system by the different options that they invested in. Our decision support tool was based on an Excel spreadsheet, and they were able to apply the different solutions in that Excel spreadsheet.
Great. And that Excel spreadsheet is actually what we'll be playing with in the breakout group if you decide that you'd like to join us for that breakout group. Thanks, Michelle. And so ultimately, just wrapping up, the multi-hazard tournament kind of provides and supports a more systematic understanding of constraints and solutions and priorities within a watershed. And it helps us to bring those plans and some of those tools to life that maybe otherwise sit on the shelf, and it helps to raise awareness and relationship building as well. And so for now, I'll just leave you with thinking about how your organization might be able to use that kind of framework. And I'll turn it over to Hunter.
Thank you, Michelle. Let me go ahead and pull Hunter, give you the controls so that you can share your presentation while you get started. So in the as that one it pops up, please do use the chat box to type in your questions, and we'll respond. We'll have Hunter and Andrea respond to all the questions after Hunter gets through his presentation. It's all yours, Hunter.
Okay, thank you. Can you see me and can you hear me okay, Diana?
I cannot see you. I can see your slide and I can hear you perfectly. I wonder if...
Hunter, I can see you. That helps.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, good.
Maybe that's just my limitation.
Not critical, but anything we can do in the virtual space to close the gap is helpful. So now you have a face with a name, or video with a name, and it's a pleasure to be here. I really appreciate this forum and the opportunity to speak. My name's Hunter Merritt, as Diana introduced me. I have no problem whatsoever if what you're interested in is Andrea's multi-hazard tournament, and you want to focus on that. You should focus on migrating to her space, that we're going to all be migrating to one space or the other for an interactive session. But my presentation here that'll lead up to that will probably be done about 5 minutes till the hour, and then we'll split. Folks who are interested in this can stay in this room and we can experiment, and I'd like for people to come off of mute and to talk, and we can interact that way on this topic. Or folks can migrate to Andrea's web space and talk a little bit more about the multi-hazard tournament. I can give my testimonial, and that is that Andrea was willing to come out and give us a demonstration for the state of California, for NRCS. Some of you are familiar with NRCS, part of the Department of Agriculture. Other folks who are in our district and also in our division, to give a demonstration of the capabilities of multi-hazard tournament, and I'm excited about that product and that tool for shared vision planning. I'm also excited about anything that can be a medium for communicating because communicating complexity is sort of what is incumbent on all of us. It doesn't matter what science you're in or what expertise you have. If you can't communicate what we're doing and why, and to the right audience, it sort of just falls short. So my hope is, in this presentation, to tell you a little bit of my history on flood risk communication and education, and what we've been pursuing in terms of serious gaming. So the title is Gamification for Flood Risk, and if nothing else, we'll provide a definition for gamification. It might be a new word to you. It's a nice and big, complicated looking word. And I say that it's serious because serious gaming is actually another term. And Andrea already gave a demonstration of what a serious game could do and what it looks like. Many thanks again to Groundwork USA and also the River Network and the Urban Waters Learning Forum. Providing an opportunity like this not only helps us to provide education or provide some outreach to folks outside of the Corps, it's also a way that we get to learn from each other. So any forum that makes that happen is a good forum in my book. I'm a lifelong learner. I love play. I have a master's in recreation, so I can say that I have a master's in play. And I'm a really big fan of experiential education, which is a big component of adult learning. It's not just for adults, though, it's for kids too. And with that, let me give you some 3 bullet points while you take a look. Presumably, Diana, you can see this slide that says, do you want to play a game?
Yes.
She opened this forum with an encouragement to all of you to download of what is essentially a video game. And you can find that on nevadafloods.org. I'll be playing the video. Keeping my fingers crossed, if all of our digits work, I'll play a quick tutorial through this presentation. But if anything else fails, I want to give you the 3 bullet points that I have, and that is, 1, systems are complex. I think we all know it, but I think we all feel it in different ways. And we're not dealing with simple problems. We're dealing with complex problems, and systems thinking is what's required. It's really hard to communicate systems thinking, and we need to develop tools if we don't have them. 2, models versus games. You may already all be well aware of the difference, but if you aren't, there's sort of an arc that goes between, is something a game or is something a model? We'll talk a little bit about that. They're similar, and in fact, we'll talk about how similar they are in my world as of late. And the last point is that education is a form of non-structural flood risk reduction, which is the Corps' business. The Corps' business is not education. It's not one of our mission areas. So when we talk about doing education, people say that is a different department. But we do have the responsibility to communicate flood risk because it is, in and of itself, a form of flood risk reduction. If you know what's going on in your backyard, you can make an informed decision about what to do. That's every age group. That's every demographic there is. If you can know where to go and how to get out, it's a huge part of your own risk reduction. And we're sort of seeing that come to bear. So first point, systems are complex. You may have seen something like this before. You can see at the top, that's a model. This is a model. It's just a conceptual model. And just in the one little bit of talking about stream bank erosion, there's all of these different complex factors. So systems are complex. We know that, and we're trying to do our best. So I want to tell you modeling story. I just took a writing class, and it talks about how scientists need to learn how to tell stories. So I would rather tell you a story than try to give you data. Here's an interesting story. A little bit after World War II, in San Francisco Bay, which is what an image you see here, a map, there was a gentleman by the name of John Reber. He was a school teacher. He was a movie producer. Here he is right here in the left-hand corner, and he came up with an idea to solve a whole bunch of problems all at once in California. One problem is water, not enough water in LA, or at least the prediction of the people that would be moving there. And how to get to water there. Another problem is shipping. How do you get goods and services to the inland area, to the bay, from the bay? and flood risk and all kinds of other problems. And so his solution was to wall off the San Francisco Bay. I don't know if you've been to San Francisco before, but it would be a challenge, to say the least. So the Corps of Engineers was given the responsibility of trying to investigate it, and I think what we did was probably reasonable, which was we developed a model, a physical model, scale model of the San Francisco Bay with the tide going in and coming out every 15 minutes. And it's open today as an educational tool and was used for many years after it was built to try to answer questions. And the reason I mention this whole story is because we've been in the modeling business and the problem addressing business for a long, long time. We're the oldest and most venerable of your bureaucratic federal institutions. Came 2 days after the Continental Army. We moved west pretty quickly after the war, and in mapping the West for its water, mostly for navigation. We did have a part in building the Golden Gate Bridge, which you see up in the upper left, and Folsom Dam, which is a picture down here in the lower right. That's above the town that I live in, which is Sacramento, the capital of California. Many people do not know what it is that is holding back water and how it is that their flood risk is reduced. So part of my job as a water resources planner is education, because education, as I said, is a form of non-structural flood risk reduction. So what we've been at for a while is made possible through a partnership called Silver Jackets, which if you're not familiar with, I'd be glad to answer questions on. Bottom line, Silver Jackets is state-led. They're state-led teams that pull together interagency resources at a local, state, and federal level, and they address flood risk in a non-structural manner if, when, and how possible. And that's a lot of different ways, but one way is that we have been developing models and games. And the article you see here is just produced by The Buzz, which is a newsletter that we have. It was produced this past spring, tells sort of the story that I'm telling now. What we learned from that, our experience in the last 4 or 5 years here, is that as simple as we might make it, models are really difficult to make into games. What you see here is a 2015 California Educator product that you can click the link and see that and navigate to it. If you're interested in sharing this with folks, you're welcome to. It is designed for next generation science standards for kids, but a lot of teachers came back to us and a lot of folks came back to us with sort of the feedback that nice try, but as simple as you might have tried to make it, it's still too hard to grasp. So this is just one little clip of some of the inputs and outputs that might go into a computer model. Like I said, we've been doing modeling a long time. You know, snowmelt coming in and evaporation going out, and here's a reservoir, and what is the purpose below the reservoir? These are sort of the issues that we deal with. So with that, I just want to make sure that folks know that models are not just for adults and games are not just for kids. In order for it to be a game, I want to plant a seed about triadic game design. It should have some components of fun and play, which I can't tell you for sure that kids are having fun playing this particular model. It has to have some basis in reality, and it has to have some meaning. So triadic game design theory is something that's emerging. Like I said, games are not just for kids. How many of you remember this icon? If you do, you're a certain age group, and that age group is young, because that's my age group, and I feel like I'm young. So yes, this was Oregon Trails, and it was really the first educational game, video game. So not just a game, but a game for education. And that sort of proves out that we are the gamers. It's not just kids. We talk about kids, but you know, my mother-in-law is addicted to Candy Crush, and across all generations, more than half of us have played a game in the last 2 months. So this is a medium for reaching the public that we might not have been tapping into already. So that's the genesis of my effort with this, and I want to make sure that folks know that gamification is a means of taking sort of the concepts of games and then applying them in non-game contexts, like we're doing with flood risk. It is not the same as game theory. If any of you are economists out there, you might be familiar with game theory. And that's different because it's really about studying mathematical models. I'm putting to you all that we can make a game out of game theory or modeling. And Jenny, I think I saw that your name was on the list of folks. You might be familiar with this tabletop exercise that we're pursuing. I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you're interested in going off mute and saying hello, you might say hello and I can introduce you. Jenny and I have been working on doing some research on different types of games and what they might be doing in order to help us with collaborative modeling. What you're looking at is a picture of some core professionals who are experiencing a tabletop exercise that simulates a watershed. And they're developing the watershed and they're finding out the impacts of that development. So this is in sort of the phase of development that we're looking for people to come to us and play. So if you're interested in this, I encourage you to contact me or Jenny on that regard. So Andrea mentioned that they were dealing with multiple hazards. We found out that we were trying to address too many hazards, so we tried to limit it to one, and that was just flood risk. And if this works for you, I'm going to let this video play while I talk. I only got a couple minutes here before we migrate. But this is a prequel to anyone who's interested in joining and experiencing this. What you're looking at in the background is a dashboard in a simulation, which is, again, most kids would call this a video game. The notion of managing a dam for flood risk is already out of the realm of many people's knowledge. So opening gates and closing gates, having velocities, having river flow, managing the levees because they have several different aspects of levee fragility. You might have a levee be overtopped and people know about that, but they don't know what happens with through seepage and under seepage and so forth. The simulation gives you 6 different scenarios, and you can pass a scenario with a score. So you get, those who are competitive can go go in there and compete and see how well they do, and that includes a budget, managing with a budget. And then as you win those levels, you unlock pieces of information. Once again, we developed this with the notion that we would be rolling it out to teachers, science teachers in the STEM fields. But it's also, I've been approached before by levee, the levee safety folks, and they say this would be a great thing to do at a public meeting. You could just set up a laptop and put it in the corner and have people just play. This is place-based in Reno, Nevada, or this is place-based in Nevada because it was a partnership with Nevada DWR and the Nevada Department of Environmental Protection. And we're now working on rolling it out to a lot of school groups and unified school districts. And we just presented at the National Science Teachers Association last month. What could be next with this particular product? Gosh, the sky's the limit. What if we had a multiple player, multiple platform game where my output of my dam was your input of your dam, and you have to help work with me on your goals and mine? I mean, it's just one of many ideas. And there may be a particular place-based issue in your state that we would try to gamify. We do own the source code, and when I say we, I mean the citizens own the source code. So if anybody's interested in hacking this, I'd be glad to provide the source code. Once again, the opportunity to play is right in front of us, so we're going to migrate to do that. But I really hope that you would grasp this idea of gamification as a means of communication, and hopefully we'll play a little bit. So thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Hunter. I want to make sure, there's a question that came in from Andrea. I do want to make sure that you all are able to make your way towards that last, to download the game if you'd like, and to get over to the WebEx room. But Andrea, question while people do that. So the tournaments use some very complex concepts and technical language. Can you describe the process you use to help people become comfortable with the terms and process, and what's the learning curve like? Do you have any recommendations for how to adapt it to various audiences? Is there anything that you could respond to there?
Okay, so if I understand kind of the crux of the question, it's how do you get audiences or maybe even clients kind of on board with the tournament process and how it's set up? And if that is the question, then often what we do is we start out with, we have a couple of base questions that we often start the conversation with. And you know, they might be, so what issues are you having in the basin? Or what are some of the challenges that you want to explore? And it's something as simple as those starting questions. And then as you build your tournament, you might say, you know, what would you like to achieve? So is it relationship building, education, planning, or decision making? And then how much time and money do you have to spend? And who are you trying to reach? So those are often the logistics questions of, you know, what are we doing and why? And then the content kind of stems from there. So again, what are the problems? What solutions? Are there certain scenarios you want to test? And are there any specific locations? And that truly is the start of the conversation. What we then do is, you know, once we have the idea of the complexity, we can talk about what resources do we have available. And so that's often the next question. Are there data sets? Or if we don't have data sets, do we have experts that we can rely on? So for the first Texas tournament, we used expert opinion to build our Excel sheet. And so in the back of the Excel sheet, it said, you know, low, medium, or high impacts. And we use expert opinion to fill out those concepts. So it can be as kind of as simple or as asking those starting questions and then figuring out, okay, what sets of information do you have and what skills do you have to bring to the table and build that tournament from there.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and break up into a couple of groups. Those of you who are moving on to the WebEx space, you can see the link up top. You're going to go off with Andrea. In case you don't come back to this room, I just want to thank everybody for joining, and do let you know that as soon as you close the GoToWebinar, there is an evaluation form, so please take a minute to fill it out and give us some feedback. And maybe the wisest thing to do would be don't close this room until you are on WebEx. Andrea, are you already in that WebEx room ready to move into the, you know, into that space?
I am indeed. I'm hosting, and as you join the WebEx, you'll have an option of how to connect to audio. You'll see a phone symbol, so you can choose whether to have the WebEx call you, which is what I would recommend, or you can call into the WebEx. Either one will work.
Okay, great. And so go ahead and make your way there. So Andrea, if you want to maybe not close down this room, but put yourself on mute, just in case people have any questions, I can continue to communicate with you via the chat box if they have any technical issues. But otherwise, I would just encourage those of you who want to try your hands at Nevada Floods game, go ahead and stay here with Hunter. So with that, I'm going to turn the presenter rights back to you, Hunter. Are you ready for that?
I am ready. Thank you.
All right, perfect.
I will not show video. I'll just have this space right here, and I hope, well, you have the slide deck, and I hope that you might be able to share that with anybody who's interested. And if you're logging on with Andrea, that's awesome. For me, what I'd like to do is just as a prequel to where we're going to go with playing games. You know, a lot of what has happened in the research that we've done, is active research that we've done, is that we're discovering there's a lot of this kind of stuff going on in different columns. The column that's going on in science education right now is almost keeping up with the column that we have in trying to do flood risk education. Well, it's beyond flood risk education, but it's in terms of taking complexity and simplifying it to be accessible, or taking concepts and trying to make them applicable. We're meeting in the middle, and so that National Science Teachers Association conference, I discovered this is another free tool that's out there. So ITSI, ITSI, was briefed by some educators, some water educators here in California and in Concord, Massachusetts. And this free activity basically is a modeling activity for introducing nature-based solutions or just different solutions to water issues. I won't go, that's not the purpose of today, but I wanted to just share with you just an image of that so that if you wanted to dive into that, that's something that's there. Another thing that I found was I've been working a lot with a board game, with different board games, like I showed in my presentation. A very successful tool that has been developed by the County of Marin here in California, which is facing sea level rise as a big issue, is a board game called the Game of Floods. And that too is free. All the materials are free, and they're just sitting, waiting to be utilized. Now, it might not be applicable to your particular area, but it's just another example of board games that are being developed for these kinds of purposes. Okay, so here I am at the home page, is where you might go if you were going to be downloading this game, and I'm wondering if anybody can, Diana, can anyone speak if they go off mute, or is this one-way communication only? Or is it no communication at all?
No, I have just unmuted everybody, so, but you have to unmute yourself, actually. I give you the right to unmute yourself. So if you have any questions, if you'd like to speak up now, go into that attendee, go into your audio tools.
How am I just, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Can anyone else just say hello? You don't even have to tell me who you are.
Hi, this is Maria with Groundwork USA.
Perfect. Thank you, Maria. I just wanted to make sure there was someone out there. Okay. So presumably you're still hanging on with me here to either watch or play along with Flood Fighter Nevada. And I'm going to, rather than ask everyone to verify what they're doing, I'm going to assume that you have queued up the game and are in the office. And what I mean by that is I'm going to queue up, basically what everyone should have done is to click the link, find one of these three links. If you've got a PC, it's Windows 32. You would open up the zip file and drag that zip file to your desktop or to a folder on your desktop. There are two files. One is the folder with all the data, and the other file is the executable file. And once those are in a folder on your desktop, I have a little icon here in the bottom, which you should be able to see in my screen while I'm showing it. You should be able to double-click or click that and have this open up. People's audio might be on in a moment, and I'm going to show you how to turn the audio off. It doesn't matter to have whether it has background music or not. And Diana or Maria, can you see my office right now?
Yes, yes, I can.
Marvelous, great. So it's working just as planned, which is a miracle for anything technological. So I click the iPad that's on my virtual desk, and I'm going to turn the music volume all the way off. Okay, I'm going to leave the master volume and the sound effects volume up, just because I like the sound effects. And I'll point to you right here that there are three profiles: Rachel, Project Wet, and there's a H down here. And I can click this, and I can erase that profile, and I'll lose all the files in that profile. And now it creates a space for me to click a new profile. And here we go. We're opening up a brand new profile. It's good to know, because if you have the computer being played by several people, they can keep, at least 3 of them can keep their own score. So the newly hired water resource engineer is named Hunter, and I'm going to accept that. And he says, hello, nice to meet you. It is your first time playing. You can go with the tutorial, but I'll tell you this, most kids don't. Most people don't. And I am just as faulty as anyone by not reading the manual. So I will click no on the tutorial, but you could always reactivate it if you wanted. If anyone clicked a tutorial, you might be behind. You might have to just click in order to just keep clicking the left click button on the mouse to reach a space. So a little navigation around on my office here is that the iPad, as it said, it had options for sound and profiles and so forth. The little Learn More computer is not critical, it's not necessary, but it is the tool that we use in order to share the information that we used to provide in textbooks and handbooks and pamphlets. We're repackaging this kind of information now. And so you can learn a lot about flood safety, dam safety. There's a video in here about dam safety that was produced by Nevada DWR. And you can learn about the different types of flooding, flash flood, dam, levee. These are locked. I can't open these because I have not yet passed the first level. So this tells you a little bit about Hoover Dam, this tells you a little bit about flood safety, and that's kind of where we are with our handbook. Once again, not critical to play, but it's a nice way of repackaging educational material. So here I am in my map, and my first level is Tutorial Town. Simple project, which is to plan and execute the management of a dam above a town with 2 levees, one on left, one on right of the river. And I need to begin planning for that. And the way that that's done is that I can choose easy, normal, or hard. I'm going to go ahead and choose easy. I'm going to choose 1, 2, or 3 patrol trucks. You'll notice that they cost money in the yellow block below. There's a difference in money that it costs. And the number of repair trucks. You can buy more patrol trucks or repair trucks in the middle of the scenario, but we'll start out with 2. Next is a levee type, either dirt, the least expensive, a rock levee, more expensive, an eye wall, more expensive still, and a T-wall, which is the most expensive, most resilient. So if we just said it's going to be a rock wall, a rock levee, and we start this scenario, what we have is a tutorial town. This is the place that you're going to get started. If you want to use the keyboard, the WASD, those are ways that you can navigate. And if you don't use those, you can just use your mouse by scrolling up or scrolling down or left or right. If you use 2 fingers on the mouse, you can tilt your angle like so. And if I go up to the top, it'll go forward. And it'll only go forward so far. And if I go back, you can see there's a dam to my left. It's got 4 gates and they're all open. And just to the left side of the dam is a place where my patrol trucks and repair trucks are parked. If I send a repair truck, it'll leave, and it takes a little while to get to the levee. That yellow truck you see there is a patrol truck, and it's going over to a levee. It's going to take a look, and it's going to tell me that there's a little bit of cracking. It costs a little bit of money for him to do the patrol. Now he's going to head home. So these guys are back and forth, and you'll notice that I have it on auto patrol. So my auto patrol is on. I could also set to auto repair. And I go ahead and do that now just because I want to save myself the trouble. Because that had some cracking, it looks like my repair truck is going to head out and he's going to go and try to repair that levee before it gets much worse. So you see the rain's coming, and we need to make sure that there's space in the reservoir behind the dam. The way that there's space is that you grab and drag up your outflow gates, and you can drag all 4 to the top, and it releases as much water as possible out of the dam. To the left of those gates is the reservoir capacity. This is the conservation pool. The top of the conservation pool is where above that you get into a flood pool, and now you're getting into some trouble territory. this bright green line is what's projected inflow based on what you have held back in your gates and what inflow you're expecting. At the top, you see that there's an emergency alert system that's telling me there's going to be a thunderstorm in the next 30 hours. It might have a little bit of information on how much I should be releasing. Now, if I'm releasing as much as possible, that's great for the levee. I'm sorry, that's great for the dam and great for the reservoir, at least from a flood risk perspective, but it also heightens the river and it increases the river intensity. So that scour is going to be much more damaging to the levees downstream. I'll pause here for just a moment and ask anyone to speak up and tell me ask me a question or tell me where you are.
I'm just following along, Hunter, in what you're doing on your screen.
Uh-huh.
And I guess my question is, there's so many different components here that you seem to be able to manipulate. Do folks, when they come into this game, can they, are they all hands on deck with all of these, or is there a way to just kind of isolate, just the flows, say the dam outflow, and sort of see what happens? It feels quite complex. So I don't know to what extent people hone in, or you're playing with all of the different parameters across the board.
That is you are playing with all the parameters across the board. It is a bit nerve-wracking. And I hate to say it, but that is what water management looks like today. You can ask just about any dam operator out there that this is sort of what that needs to be considered. It's interesting that, okay, so what you see here, I'm going to pause for a moment and say that the red blinking is obviously that because the ground is saturated, there's now a lot of inflow is going to be heading into the river and could be overtopping levees. So let me close all the gates, and maybe it'll bring down the river level. You can see that the gates are going to shut off here in just a second. 1, 2, 3, 4. The gates close. Viewing charts. One of the things that you can do here is see how much rainfall, how much inflow, saturation, what's the reservoir. The reservoir level is going up, the outflow is going down, obviously, the river level going up and now being brought down, and the temperature. So, yeah, in answer to your question, it is absolutely complex. No, it is not possible to isolate variables. And yes, that's a challenge.
Yeah.
So it looks as though my reservoir might be getting to the point where I need to start releasing more water. And I, as I said, I chose not to have a tutorial, and I chose to sort of kind of just jump into the game and play. A teacher might ask students to make a plan for how they're going to manage it. Pause the game and then say, okay, given that there's this scenario, there's going to be projected inflow. What does that mean? Now, I'm not a science teacher, so I'm not going to presume to know what the curriculum development or what the curriculum is asking for. But I will say that it is a more realistic scenario in terms of trying to explain sort of what does inflow mean, what does saturation mean. So if you could conceptualize pausing this and having a discussion on what is going on, then we can again, it's a matter of trying to unpack the complexity of systems thinking.
Mhm.
Okay, so you'll see that it's getting dark. Go ahead.
A question. Oh, go ahead.
This is Maria again. Do you have any data on how many students have used this so far and what kind of age ranges are it's most applicable for teaching these concepts?
Great question. Data is anecdotal. So I will say that it has been rolled out. It was rolled out in February of 2017. There is not a, it was given to the state of Nevada and put on their homepage of nevadafloods.org. Yay, I got an A-. Okay. I'll have to tell you about that A- in a second. But to answer your question, that's where we are right now in terms of proving out the validity and the efficacy of the tool as an educational tool. We're looking to get it into classrooms this year and then track how it's being used, if it's being used, what is it doing. Again, I'm not a formal educator and I'm not a researcher in education, but I'm partnering with UNR, University of Nevada, Reno, and the Department of Education to try to get an answer to the question that you have. What I can say is we have made about 200 thumb drives with the game on it, and we've given all of them out. We've been invited to go and speak to Project WET Nevada and the National Science Teachers Association in Reno. They just had a conference in October. So the word is out, and I'm looking for any partners in education that might be interested in helping me track its progress as a tool.
Mary, a related question to that came in is, what is the cost of developing something like this? And is this something that the Army Corps brings their expertise, and there's potential for partnering, for creating similar tools for a different use in local context?
Great question. The answer to that is we've already developed this game and that we own the source code. So presumably if someone knows how to use Unity, which is the platform that this was built on, and they would like to take the source code, I would hope that it would be a fraction of the cost. We spent about $100,000 having it made, and that didn't include the oversight of the effort. I mean, in terms of my administrative effort and the outreach involved and so forth. So not prohibitively expensive for the return on the investment, I think, especially when you compare it to a levee or a dam or some other thing that you might build to reduce risk. I feel like education goes a long way for the return on the investment. However, we wouldn't be able to do this again. I think this is a one opportunity that we had. We did what we did, and we were glad to do it with the partner that we had in Nevada. We have expertise to do another round of this through our research and development arm called ERDIC. And we're looking for partners who would be interested in basically coming in to say, we want to have this as a tool, we'd like you to help develop it, and here's the goal. I've queued up a project proposal, but it's just another flood risk project proposal. What if we had something that had to do with, fish passage? What if we had something to do with sea level rise? What if we had, and there were so many different issues that we could tackle. What we're looking for is partners with ideas who are willing to come in and have the conversation. This is another long answer to a short question, but I'm excited by it. What we did for this game, I'll back up and tell the story that I told before, which was the first thing we got was an appeal to help with modeling, teaching modeling to students, and the model we developed internally was inaccessible because of the complexity. This was the second effort at that, and it was much closer to something that was engaging. We lent our expertise. I basically said, here's what happens when it floods. And I had a water management professional on our staff who talked about what that might look like in terms of metrics. And this is the output of that was the the people that developed the game, which we are not developers of games, developed this based on our intellectual input. I hope that answers the question to a degree.
Yeah. Yep.
I'll point out here, before I exit the main menu, that what this scoring breakdown provides is a snapshot that people can talk about. Well, here's how much you started with for a budget. Here's how much you spent. What if you were to do it differently? The A- is based on a percentage score, and the percentage score captures both the amount of money spent and the objectives reached, which is balancing the reservoir need with not flooding the town through either levee break or dam overtopping. So when I exit the main menu, what this does is it gives me now scenario 2. It opens up another level. And I'll just go ahead and put this up and start playing. If people are watching, then they can watch along. If people are playing, they can ask questions. Laughlin is the same scenario, but it's in Southern Nevada, and because it's in Southern Nevada, they're teaching the next level of the challenge of non-porosity. So the desert landscape is extremely dry and non-porous. That means the ground will not absorb water. That might be something that everybody thinks everyone knows, but you'd be surprised. A lot of folks don't. The time it takes for rainwater to reach the reservoir is dramatically lowered. So here we are again in Laughlin, Nevada. So as I play through this scenario, I will just kind of, fidget around with some of the different tools here. I get a better score if I don't turn on auto patrol and auto repair. You'll notice that I chose an eye wall. So while I might be successful, I did spend more money up front. That might be a consideration too. Diana, Maria, any other questions, thoughts?
Yeah, I have a question, Hunter.
Yeah.
So far, these scenarios focus on structural solutions. Do any of the levels go into non-structural solutions, green infrastructure, anything like that?
Well, yes and no. You're right that it is all based on structural solutions, at least for these 2 levels. But there is the next level is snow melt without a dam, and the goal of that level is to manage the debris that is going to be hitting the bridge. So you're clearing debris. Now, is that a non-structural solution? I guess it is, because what you're doing is clearing debris from a bridge. In terms of what you mean by nature-based solutions and so forth, we have not. We have just barely scratched the surface with this. I'm excited about future opportunities to say within the planning, what if you chose to plant willows? What would the willows do? And that, of course, needs to be modeled and somehow inserted into the game. So, so there's a yes answer and a no answer to your question.
Well, thank you so much, Hunter, for walking us through this, and I can hear echo. And I want to make sure that we share, folks, your contact information if they wanted to initiate any kind of conversation about what else could be possible. Because I can anticipate, especially when it comes to sea level rise and a lot of the folks that are living on the coast, this kind of scenario gaming could be super helpful to meet their needs. And I don't know if you're familiar with anybody who's developing those tools now. Nope.
I think that we're right on the cusp of a bunch.
Yeah.
Is there anyone out there that's doing it or know anyone?
If you're not, if you can, anybody, I think everybody's unmuted, you can also write into the question box. I've not heard of any. I've heard of some games around water quality, but nothing so far that is this interactive and this sophisticated, if you will. Probably the beginning of possibly many others to come. So we are almost at the bottom of the hour, so do you have any last comments, Hunter, before I kind of close things off?
Yeah, I just would really put to you all that there is this mental division between kids and adults, and when we use the word game, a lot of people think, oh, that's for kids. I challenge that notion because we all play games. We might not call them games. We might call them tabletop scenarios, but embrace the notion that it's a game. The other thing is that what if it's for kids? Who cares? Because my stakeholders are not even voting age yet. But by the time we have a solution that we need people to vote for, they probably will be voters. So if we can plant this seed right now, I mean, I have a lot of teachers that are trying to teach this stuff to students, and we don't have the capacity to be in every classroom. So anything that we can build to hand off to teachers that they can use, and then they can send folks back to us informed and ready to kind of make decisions with us, I think is a great investment. It's a long-term investment, and it's one that's going to have a lot of return, because the voting public is going to need to be able to be informed on what it is that we're trying to ask for in terms of an investment. So right now they're playing games, and let's play games with them and then help them slide in that message so that they'll be aware. That's pretty much my mantra. I've been at it for a couple years.
That's great insight. Thank you so much, Hunter. I'm going to go ahead and pull up my own screen so that people can see. I don't know if people can see it now. Let's see. If people can see your address. Can you see that, Hunter?
Not yet, but it's in the slide deck, and I'll type it in my chat box right now.
Okay, please do. So want to thank both you and Andrea. Everybody, we immediately following, I think by tomorrow you will get an automated email that has the recording to today's session and has all the slides, including Andrea's as well, and their contact information. So please go ahead and take a look at that. Let us know if you have any questions, or if you want to follow up with them directly. That would be great. You can also share today's session with anybody in your office that might be interested in seeing it. Hunter, you may want to put that out to everybody. I don't know if everybody can see what you just posted.
I can, but it's up there on your splash page. So hunter.merritt@usace.army.mil. Please reach out.
Great. Thank you so much.